Welcome back to another lesson of the Church of the Master Safe Sanctuary Policy. This is lesson 2, Nuts and Bolts, and I'm Bev Pancoast, the Director of Youth Ministry and the staff member who oversees the Child Protection Policy for our church. In this lesson, we're going to look at some of the pieces and parts of the Safe Sanctuary Policy that make Church of the Master Church of the Master. So let's get going. So we have some basic volunteer qualifications that we have when we talk to anyone about being a ministry partner with us in children and youth or older and vulnerable adults at Church of the Master. And here are the basic qualifications. They need to be at least 18 years old, at least 4 years older than the oldest child or youth they will be supervising, and a member or active constituent at Church of the Master for at least 6 months before they can volunteer with our children and or our youth ministry programs. So let's break that down a little. First of all, if someone is wanting to work with our older and vulnerable adults, it remains the same, 18 years or older. We do not need to have someone 4 years older than the oldest person when we're talking about older and vulnerable adults, because, well, that doesn't necessarily work. But we do talk about 4 years older than the oldest child or youth. Someone will be supervising to make sure that we have a gap enough for feeling like someone's a leader versus just their friend. And so if we have someone who's 18 years old, they definitely could be a lead volunteer for us in our children's ministry program. And we are grateful that we get our 18-year-olds who are heading into senior year of high school or even graduating, and then we get to use them over the summer before they go off to college in our children's ministry program. They could possibly work with our junior high program. It would be dependent upon the age of the oldest member of the junior high group, because you can have 14-year-olds and 4 years older makes 18-year-olds. But if there's anyone who's on the older end of that and turns 15, then that 18-year-old would not be able to work with our youth program. And of course, an 18-year-old would not be working as a leader, as one of our 2 people leaders when it comes to the high school youth program, because there wouldn't be a 4-year gap. The other piece is that someone needs to be a member or active constituent at Church of the Master for at least 6 months before they could volunteer with our children or youth ministry programs. So what we're saying here is that we want to make sure that we know who someone is before we just go ahead and let them be part of the Church of the Master volunteer staff for our children and our youth. If any stranger or new member can have immediate access to our children, we have failed to provide the safe sanctuary we promised our children at their baptism. And so it's important that we have that time where we get to know someone for 6 months before we have them as part of our program, just to make sure that we are keeping our children and our youth safe. There's paperwork if you're going to be a volunteer with us. All volunteers who work within our ministries will complete and sign an application and the related waivers to check references and background information. And you will find that all at www.chmaster.org. The forms are fillable online, so you don't even have to print them out and get them back to us. You can fill them out and then send them back to us that way. We ask that you provide the names and contact information for 2 personal references. That is part of the volunteer application. If you could at all give us email addresses, that would be fantastic, because then we could send a reference form and get that filled out and sent back to us in a much faster nature than if we have to email, or if we have to snail mail something to someone, wait for them to fill it out, and then send it back. And then undergo a criminal background check at no expense to you if you will have supervisory program responsibility for our children or youth and or our older and vulnerable adults. What we mean by a supervisory program responsibility would be if, in fact, you are a volunteer in youth ministry and you are there on Sunday nights or during a weekday Bible study. You are someone who goes on our retreats with us, you do summer mission with us, any of those pieces where the contact is can be personal, if it's an overnight experience for a retreat or at a mission trip, anything like that, we're going to go ahead and run background checks on our volunteers. In our children's ministry program, supervisory roles would be if you do a program that doesn't have staff member leadership to it, or you are doing a program that is not something where you and your group of children can always be seen by lots of other people, then we will background check you. That big example would be at day camp. If you are coming in to lead arts and crafts for us for a day, and you are in the big open field area under one of our pop-ups, but there's no walls on it, so everything is very visual to everyone else, we most likely would not run the background check. If you are one of our crew leaders who have your family group in the woods and you do some stuff there and then you move around the camp, but there's a lot of times it's just you and your other volunteer moving the kids, then we will run background checks just to make sure that we are not putting anyone in a bad position. We do allow youth volunteers. While recognizing the important role of volunteers in our children and youth ministry, all of our activities involving children and youth are to be supervised by at least one person who is 18 years of age. A youth volunteer between the ages of 12 and 17 must be 4 years older than the oldest child or youth they are working with. So a 12-year-old sixth grader who is very excited once the pandemic is done to be able to volunteer in our children's program could very well be a helper on a Sunday morning in dewdrops, but not with our rainbows, because our rainbows are kindergarten through third, fourth grade, and they would not be 4 years older than a third or fourth grader who would be in that program. So they also couldn't be a volunteer within the youth ministry program to oversee youth ministry, because that definitely would not work in that makeup. So there we have that. Before we move on, just a blanket statement about our volunteers. When we run background checks, if we find something in a background check that leads us to believe that it would not be a good fit for someone to work with our children and youth ministry programs, we will be as discreet as possible as we can. We will not post it all over the place, but we certainly are not going to let someone who has ever been charged with a felony of causing harm to a child or youth in any form to be a volunteer within our program. Most of the time we don't even see that. In my 26 years of being in youth and children's ministry, only once have I ever had a background check come back where I had to talk to someone about their background and then ask them to withdraw their plans to volunteer. That was a long time ago. And I'm glad I've not had to do it again. A lot of times, if people know we're going to be running background checks and we're going to be checking references, that sort of self-weeds people out of volunteering if they know there's something in their past that would be not compatible with working with our children and youth. So a little bit about our supervision of ministry workers with our children and youth. Here we go. We have a 2 adult rule, or you might say a 2 volunteer rule. 2 approved adults must be present at all times. This applies to classroom activities and activities away from the church facility. Like we just said, you can have a volunteer who's at least 18, and then their second be a trained youth member, and that would count as your 2 adult or 2 volunteer program. And what it is that the 2-person rule requires that employees, volunteers, and supervisors will make every reasonable effort to avoid situations where an employee or volunteer is alone with a child or youth. When an employee or ministry volunteer is alone with students, we will notify the age level ministry leader or another staff member if it's the age level staff ministry leader who is alone. Community groups of children or youth who meet at the church should have 2 or more leaders present whenever possible. If the group is staying overnight at the church, or if a church-sponsored group leaves the premises, 2 or more leaders must be present, and all overnight events must include at least 1 male and 1 female adult if the group is of mixed gender. That also includes when we go, when youth ministry is out and about, and if we're staying at a hotel, that we will break rooms down by girls and boys, and then adults, adult males, adult females. A youth could be in a room with an adult if there's one of two scenarios. One, it's 1 adult and 2 youth, or it's 2 adults and 1 youth. And then the youth have to have separate bed from the adults. A youth and an adult could not share a bed unless it is a mother-daughter, father-son sort of combo. Then that would be different. When we look at the number of volunteers we need for an event, we base it off of the Ohio Department of Children's Services ratios that they ask for in daycares and schools and summer camps that are of public nature and private nature. We, though, have taken it and said that instead of just the 1 to whatever number ratio it is, it's a 2 to whatever ratio. So you can look and see that under 12 months, we have a 2 to 5 ratio. Under 18 months, well, between 12 and 18 months, it's 2 to 6. Our toddlers, 18 months to and under 2.5 are 2 to 7. Our toddlers who are 2.5 and under 3 are 2 to 8. Once we hit our 3-year-old preschool kids, we're 2 to 12. We have preschool, our 4 and 5-year-olds at 2 to 14. Our kindergarten through 5th grade is 2 to 18, and grade 6 to 12 is 2 to 20. So when we're looking at a program and what kind of volunteers we're going to need, this is our minimum number of volunteers. But what you also need to know is that if we have a mixed group of children in a program, then the ratio that we follow is actually the ratio of the youngest kids. For instance, at Kids Night In, it is for 3-year-olds through 5th grade. That means that although our kindergarten through 5th grade is a 2 to 18 ratio, our 3-year-old ratio is 2 to 12. So our minimum starts at 2 volunteers and goes up from there. So once we hit 13 volunteers, then we have the need for a 3rd volunteer. And then they would cover the next 12, assuming it's all in one big group. And then at 25, we'd have to put a 4th in. We always want more volunteers. We never want to be bare bones, but that's sort of the basics on how this works. The thing, though, is if there's going to be groups of children at something like Kids Night In, then each group needs to have the two worker rule, but also then still fitting into that ratio. And it's still, even if the groups are multi-age, or even if they're split, so the younger kids and the older kids, it still would need to fall within the right ratios of the youngest kids in those groups. We do have a 2-person rule exception. And this is how it works. If a paid staff member is the one on duty, then the following scenarios are acceptable. During a church-sponsored event, 1 paid church worker may provide childcare for a group of 5 children or less. The childcare must be provided in a room where the door can be left open or where there is a window in the door. There will be a staff member on call if a problem arises in the nursery. That means that if the director of children's ministry is covering the nursery for an event, they can have 5 children or less in there who meet the age requirements for the nursery. And then there would need to be another staff member on call in case there was a problem, which would most likely fall to one of the other program staff members during an event. Youth small groups that happen within the context of a larger program, as long as the door to the room is being used is unlocked and has a window in it, then there could be just one adult with those students. And a big example of that would be on Thursday nights during M&Ms. The last half hour is our youth Bible study or Bible studies. And we are rooms right off of the fellowship hall. Doors have windows, we keep them unlocked, and there are plenty of adults floating by at any point. So we feel that that is a safe enough option that it's okay if there's just a one adult within that small group of students. We have a couple important guidelines for our nursery. Only assigned workers may be in the nursery. There are two exceptions to this rule: nursing mothers and parents called to the nursery to calm an upset child. What is not okay are friends of the youth workers coming in to hang out during nursery hours. Also, if someone wants to come in and snuggle the babies because they've not been able to be with their grandchildren and really miss that, we would be glad to have that person volunteer with us, but we need to make sure that they're trained in safe sanctuary and that it's a scheduled thing. It's not just a drop-in thing. The other one is that only parents or designee, like an aunt, an uncle, or grandparent, can receive their child from the nursery. Nursery workers should release children only to their parents or designee. An older sibling, upper elementary and above, can pick up a sibling as long as a parent or guardian has previously approved that. So for instance, if we have a high school youth who has a younger sibling in the nursery, or a junior high student, or even an upper elementary, like 4th or 5th grade, and they are going to go to the nursery to pick up their sibling, that can happen as long as a parent or guardian has previously approved that and let the nursery workers know that that is an okay scenario. A little bit about the doors for our classrooms. All of our classrooms and office doors we do have a window or visibility from a hallway or remain open while occupied. We have an open door policy at Church of the Master. All age levels and events should be open door. That means that workers and parents and church members have the right to observe any children or youth ministry activity. We will not make those events closed off so that parents can't check in and see how things are going. We might encourage family members of younger children who are working on staying at, with our workers and not ready to mom and dad. We might ask you to consider whether it's the right time to do that just for your own child's sake. But to make sure that you feel like you can walk in and see what we're doing is an important piece of our ministry programs at Church of the Master. The church needs to deal with this issue as a good shepherd by taking steps to protect those in our care. Physical affection should be appropriate to the age of the child or youth. For instance, it is perfectly okay if a 2-year-old is sitting on the nursery worker's lap and gives them a big hug and maybe a kiss on the cheek. It is not okay for a youth to be sitting on a youth worker's lap and do the same, with the exception of if it's a parent and child relationship. That would be different. But touching should be initiated by the child or youth. It should be a response to the child or youth's need for comforting, encouragement, or affection. It should not be based on the adult's emotional need. Ideally, touching and affection should only be given in the presence of other children's or ministry or youth workers. It's much less likely that touches will be inappropriate or misconstrued as when the 2 adult workers are present and the touching is open to observation. This rule is especially important when we're diapering babies or helping a young child change clothes in the restroom. If you have an experience where you need to help a young one go to the bathroom. We understand that. In our nursery, there's a bathroom right there. So whether it's just that you sort of keep the door open a little bit so anyone else can hear what's going on, or if you have kids downstairs in room 8, the pre-KK room that has its own bathroom, same thing. If you have a bunch of kids who need to go to the bathroom at an event and they're young, my suggestion would be to take them to the women's restroom in the basement, because there's more stalls there, so more kids can go at once. But you can also kick that door to the fellowship hall open and be right inside the door and be able to help the students, the children, with snaps and buttons or whatever that they might need help with, but do it in a way where it's not just you and one kid in a stall. Just think about like common, what common folk thoughts would be. Too touchy. Church workers must promptly discuss inappropriate touching or other questionable behavior by other workers with their ministry leaders or a pastor. You need to contact the director of children's ministry for birth through 5th grade incidents and the director of youth ministries for 6th through 12th grade incidents, or one of the pastors for older and vulnerable adults. Too touchy is something that we need to think about. We need to read the vibe that we're getting from a student. Some kids are very huggy and they're going to see you and they're going to run and give you a hug. Others might give you an elbow or a fist bump or a high five. And there's going to be people who do not want to be touched at all. And so we as leaders need to be able to read their body language to see if it's an okay thing to do or not, or ask. You never know when someone who's always been like, I don't want to be touched, will suddenly be like, no, it's okay. I would love a hug. And so we need to keep that in mind. The other thing we need to keep in mind is that as volunteers in the state of Ohio, it is mandatory that any suspicious abuse be reported to your immediate authorities with what you have seen or what you suspect. It's important that the church documents an incident. So if you are with another adult or another volunteer and you just feel like something just seems really quirky, sort of a red flag, go talk to your age level ministry leader or the pastor. We all would rather have you come with something that turns out to be nothing than for you to not come to us. And then we find out later that there has been a big problem. Want to make sure that we take care of our children and youth in our ministry programs. First aid training. So church employees who supervise children, youth, or vulnerable and older adults must maintain current certification in basic first aid and basic CPR, or the equivalent with what is offered these days. And that cost of the training is paid by the church. The church does have an AED for restarting hearts, and it has instructions that will walk you through it. It's located outside the pastor's office door in the gathering space, and all staff members have been trained on how to use the AED. New employees must get certification for first aid and CPR within 90 days of the start of their employment. Nursery workers and others serving young children must receive training in infant and toddler CPR. Other workers are encouraged but not required to get training if they frequently accompany kids on adventure activities like water sports, camping, home building, mission trips, etc. The more that are trained, the better off we can be in our safety and what we can do for our children and our youth. We do keep first aid kits, one on each floor. There are some in the kitchen. There are some there is a first aid kit in the main office, and there is one on the upper level in the children's ministry area. And I would suggest that you check with the director of children's ministry just to make sure you know where that has been put. I believe it is in the supply room, but you probably want to check because from time to time that gets moved to different locations depending on the needs of the classrooms at a certain time. When it comes to discipline, we need all of our staff and volunteers to follow these measures. If a child's behaving inappropriately, the teacher or workers will tell the child specifically what he or she is doing that is not acceptable and state what the expected behavior is. For example, we do not throw blocks. We use blocks for building. If this measure is not effective, then the children will be guided to another activity. If that inappropriate behavior continues, the child may be placed at a table to work alone, away from the other students. Still in the room, we can't have one adult or one volunteer take a kid out of the room and then be one-on-one someplace else, or even have the kid out in the hallway by themselves. That's just not something we can do. If the child's disruptive behavior continues after these steps have been taken, please notify the age-level staff member who will talk with the child and work with the child's parents to work on how we can find a way to be inclusive of that child, but also make sure that we are not putting other kids in harm's way if someone continues to throw blocks and we've asked them not to, or things like that. Corporal punishment, that is hitting or spanking, and other forms of punishment involving pain are never appropriate in Church of the Master United Methodist activities. This rule holds true even if parents have suggested or given permission for corporal punishment. In addition, yelling at a child or intentionally belittling the child are inappropriate responses by our workers. If something happens like that, the age-level ministry leader will talk with the volunteer, and if we feel that it's needed, we will look to find a different way that that volunteer can participate in the life of the church, but not necessarily anymore with our children and youth. From time to time, we will find that children or youth need to talk to an adult, and it needs to be in a more private counseling atmosphere. So we have some guidelines for that, and then any private lessons. So the door to the room is to be propped open during a session. However, in the event of counseling, all reasonable steps should be taken to preserve the confidentiality of the conversation as applicable, talking in a quiet voice, etc. Rooms with windows and the doors may also be used for these purposes. I make it a point that if I am going to be counseling with one of the youth at our church, that I make sure someone else who's there in the office knows that's going to happen and knows that I have a youth coming to talk with in my office, so they know that that's happening, and we can either keep the door open to my office, or we have the option, because it has 2 windows in it on the doors, that it can be something that we have closed, but that we've taken those other measures for. Individuals who are using church space for music lessons or tutoring or something like that must contact the facility manager for the proper paperwork. We're open to having those things happen at church, but we need to make sure that our procedures are followed, which may include having whoever's giving those lessons or tutoring be trained on our safe sanctuary policy. But your first stop would be to see our facilities manager for the proper paperwork. If there's a long-term counseling need, we believe that a volunteer or a staff member should have no more than 3 meetings on the same topic with a child or a youth. Contact your age-level ministry staff member or pastor for referrals to counseling agencies for issues that are beyond what a non-trained volunteer should be dealing with. We have a growing number of mental health issues in children and adolescents, and there's a lot that they're dealing with. And well, it's good that they turn to trusted volunteers and staff members, unless we are counselors, professional counselors, then we need to be able to refer them to a counseling agency, and staff members have a list of those options available. So just see one of the program staff members, and we can help you and help that child or youth find an appropriate counseling opportunity. We want to talk a little bit about informal contact, which is independent of church activities. Informal contact refers to phone calls, letters, or face-to-face contact between an adult worker and a youth that is not connected to official church activities. It could be because you want to hire them as a babysitter for your children, or that you see them at family gatherings that happen to be some church family members, different church families meeting together, and they are there. We know that those things happen, but just keep in mind that you are not then there on official church business. If you are going to make contact with one of our youth outside of contacting them about youth ministry things, if you're looking for a babysitter, we ask that you make sure that the youth's parents know the nature of the contact. For instance, when my son was young and I needed a babysitter, I didn't just text a kid or call a youth and say, hey, would you come and babysit for me? It was something I always mentioned to the parent first, with a simple thing of, hey, if I need a babysitter for my son, would it be okay for me to contact your child about babysitting? And once that's happened, then if your number starts popping up on a youth's cell phone and it's not someone that you're not saved in their contacts, that parents then know that number is okay for them to be receiving messages from. We do on our youth and family forums ask if it's okay. Can we contact your youth via phone call or text message for ministry things? And we get signed off on that. That doesn't include calling and asking someone to be a babysitter. That would be something, like we said, make sure that you've let the youth's parents know the nature of that contact. We have a couple policies concerning children of parents attending adult events at Church of the Master. Childcare can be scheduled for use by the children of Church of the Master United Methodist members and non-members during meetings, Bible studies, and other church events. Parents need to be on site at the church facility and supply cell phone numbers so that childcare staff can reach them quickly. There are no set hours for childcare outside of Sunday mornings. Childcare is only scheduled when requested by a ministry leader. That would be if you are leading a Bible study, or if you are a committee leader and you have someone in your Bible study or on your committee that need to have childcare, you can request that by contacting the director of children's ministries, and she will do her best to get that set up for that time. But there's a couple things that we do all need to be clear about when we're talking about children at these events. Childcare is designated for infants through kindergarten. Our nursery facilities are not designated for elementary age children and youth, and other arrangements should be made for their care. Elementary and middle school children may stay with their parents during church events and meetings unless confidentiality requires other, for example, sensitive topics. Elementary age children are not permitted to remain unsupervised in any area of the building. Middle and high school youth may wait for parents in either the gathering space or the gym. Parents of children who become disruptive may be called out of their meeting or event by any Church of the Master United Methodist staff member on duty. Childcare will remain open 15 minutes after the scheduled end of an adult meeting or activity. However, parents are encouraged to pick up their children within 5 minutes of the scheduled end of their meeting or activity, so our childcare workers can finish cleaning up and close down the room, and that we have been good stewards of their time and not take advantage of the time that they're giving to the church on an evening or on a weekend day or whenever that might be, to be part of our childcare for an event. In the event that childcare is scheduled but no child arrives, staff will stay 15 minutes past the starting time of the event to accommodate late arrivers, and then they will leave. If you request childcare for your meeting and it starts at 8, then by 8:15, if there's no youth or no children there for childcare, our staff member will close down the room and leave for the evening. So make sure that you relay that to any of your committee members or members of a Bible study, whatever it is that you're having childcare for. just remind them there's a 15-minute window that they'll come and be able to still get childcare. But after 15 minutes, our workers will leave. Thank you for watching this video. Please take a moment and click on the Google form link below in the comments to take a short quiz about the nuts and bolts of Church of the Master Safe Sanctuary Policy. Thank you again for your time, and I hope that you have a blessed day.